bombarded all the time. So what I want to say that 73 years ago, the state of Azad, Jammu and Kashmir was created as a base camp for liberating the rest of the territory. And that vow is still intact up to this day. And the real black day is October the 27th, 1947. And had the most popular leader of the Kashmiris at that time, Sheikh Abdullah, not joined ranks with Nehru and Sardar Patel, Kashmiris would not have suffered so grievously in the past 73 years. I can tell you that in the month of November, 250,000 Jammu Muslims were massacred mercilessly by the Indian National Army, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, and also the Dogra Army. This was the Holocaust, first Holocaust after the Second World War. This was the first genocide after the Second World War. And yet people do not talk about it so frequently. So what I want to say is that I wanted to highlight the history behind some of these days. Second, most of the young people, when I go to Azad Kashmir or when I go abroad, for instance, to the United Kingdom or United States, they ask a question. They said that the Security Council passed a resolution, Resolution 47, in 1948, and it said that Pakistan should withdraw its forces and then plebiscite would be held. And usually an impatient young man asks this question after raising his hand or her hand. And the answer is this, that this is a myth which is being propagated by India. The fact is that yes, Resolution 47 was passed and it said precisely what people know what it said. But what happened that this was rejected by Pakistan, this was rejected by India also for other reasons. They of course wanted Pakistan to withdraw its troops so that they could occupy the rest of the territory. So what I want to tell you is that later on there was a consultation process which was undertaken by McNaughton, and he came up with a new formula. The formula was that forces on both sides would be withdrawn. We accepted the proposal. India rejected it. And fast forward, let me take to 1952, a resolution, the United Nations Security Council resolution passed, this resolution 98, which says that both India and Pakistan would withdraw their forces. And the limit for Pakistani forces is 3,000 to 6,000, according to the estimates that were made at that time, and for India 12,000 to 18,000. The reduction had to be simultaneous on both sides. This is important. Let me also tell you that very few people are aware of Resolution 122 and an earlier resolution, which said that any changes that India was making, since this is a legal forum, therefore I'm touching on these points, that any changes in the ground realities, I'm paraphrasing that paragraph, are unconstitutional or illegal. They're legally void. And what were the changes that India was making? It established a constituent assembly, through farcical elections, and then they passed a resolution which said that the occupied territory is part of Indian Union. This was rejected by the United Nations Security Council. Let me also touch on another point. The bilateral talks on Jammu and Kashmir have been a hoax. India itself has undermined the Simla agreement, and although the Simla agreement doesn't say that Pakistan cannot have resort to the United Nations or any other international forums, India has been year after year trying to reinforce this myth that somehow Kashmir has become a bilateral issue. And I'll refer to an oxymoron, in fact, in 2015, when I think that Ambassador Bassett was ambassador there, when the National Security Advisor at that time, or the Advisor for National Security, Mr. Sartaj Aziz, he said that he wanted to go to India and meet. There were some bilateral talks scheduled, and he was to meet the Hurriyat leaders. And Sushma Swaraj, the External Affairs Minister at that time, that they can't, and the BJP leadership that he can't, that they can't meet Sartaj Aziz. And I listened to one of her press conferences, and she said, Sushma Swaraj said, the Kashmiris have nothing to do with the Kashmir dispute, that it is between India and Pakistan. So the whole framework of bilateral talks between India and Pakistan has been designed to exclude Kashmiris from Kashmir talks or dispensation for Kashmir, and to keep the United Nations at a distance. So two exclusions, Kashmiris and the United Nations, so that India keeps this mirage of bilateral talks or a solution, a hypothetical solution, and consolidates its occupation of the territory. This is what they have been doing. I'm saying this because I have heard some chatter about engagement with India. And here are some of the conditions that I want to mention. Yes, I welcome this formulation which says that if there is any negotiating table, Kashmiris should be on that table. There is a trilateral issue. And there are three parties to the dispute, three core parties to the dispute, which is Kashmiris, Pakistan and India. But trilateralizing Kashmir is not enough. I would say that any talks, any diplomacy on Kashmir must include Kashmiris, but this must be done under the auspices of the United Nations. You should not move away from the United Nations Security Council resolutions which provide the basic framework and which recognize the Kashmiris as the key constituent and key party to the dispute. That's where your legality stems from. Otherwise, India would take you back at best to the 1947 Independence Act, or after its unilateral actions last year to a no-man land. So beware, I would say, when you engage with India, because they want these optics. They have occupied the territory of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. They have annexed it to India. They have gone a step further, and they have bifurcated the territory. They are colonizing it. They have dissolved the writ of the people of occupied territory altogether. They were not recognizing APHC, but even their loyalists have been delegitimized by India and thrown away. So, in these circumstances, if there are talks, the optics would be bad for Kashmir and Pakistan, because this would be tentative. Even a slight hint of talks with India in a bilateral framework would be tantamount to legitimizing the illegal actions India has taken since August the 5th, 2019. Let me also tell you that all the violations that India has made after August the 5th are appalling, horrendous, but at the same time they violate international law, international humanitarian law, and international human rights law. The Indians have written a new textbook of violations of human rights. And here I would say, whether it's the Geneva Conventions, whether it is the ICC statute, whether it is several UN Security Council resolutions, whether it is customary international law, I can cite article after article to substantiate that India has violated international law, and that it is accountable, that India deserves to be a target of coercive measures under these laws. These laws are very explicit. Laws about ethnic cleansing, about genocide, about war crimes. These laws are very explicit. The punishments to be meted out to such perpetrators are also very clear. There is no ambiguity in them. What has been the response of the international community? Let's start with the response of Pakistan. I think the state of Pakistan stood by the Kashmiris like a solid rock last year. And there was a groundswell of support in all the streets and squares and highways of Pakistan. And we're grateful to you. We're grateful to you for what you did. And you went to the United Nations Security Council and revived the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, the dormant issue of Jammu and Kashmir after a passage of 50 years. Thank you. Thank you, Pakistan, for doing that. I have visited many capitals around the world and also New York, and your diplomats are working round the clock. And their approach is impassioned. I'm touched by their approach towards Kashmir and their dedication to Kashmir and the diligence that they are demonstrating. At the same time, I would like to add, and I have been doing that in the recent past, that a differentiation has to be made between a diplomatic effort and a political effort. Diplomats can't do politics. Let me tell you, when the foreign minister is leading an effort, he is communicating with the President of the Security Council, the President of the General Assembly, members of the General Assembly or the Human Rights Council and its leadership, High Commissioner for Human Rights or the Secretary General. Or they are going to different capitals in Jakarta and Malaysia or many other parts of the world. This is their responsibility, full-time responsibility. But what is politics? What is political support for Kashmir? And that has to come from the political leadership. All the political parties in Pakistan, they have to reach out to parliamentarians abroad, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, the European Parliament, the US Congress. By the way, the US Congress has broken the taboo that you can't speak against India. So you have new space. Or the UK Parliament, or the French Parliament, or even Madrid you have space. Or in 10 ASEAN countries you have space. That effort, I can assure you, would not be led by diplomats. Diplomats have a different function altogether. And people have been talking about lawfare, involve legal experts to reach out to ILC, International Law Commission, or to the ICJ. For instance, why can't ICJ accept a reference from the United Nations Security Council regarding illegal settlements in the occupied territory of Jammu and Kashmir? Why can't it? Because it has been done in the case of Palestine. It is in the jurisdiction of ICJ. When you talk about ICC, we would say that at the state level probably they do not have jurisdiction over Pakistan and India. But what about the ICJ? I sat through the meetings of the Security Council 2012, 2013, and I am familiar with the procedures. Referrals can be made. Referrals ought to be made because a genocide is going on in Kashmir. The international community's response can be divided into two parts. One is the international civil society, the world parliaments, the media, also think tanks. They've spoken up for you. They've given space to your voices, Kashmiri voices, or to Pakistani voices. But then there is official Washington and official Brussels and official London, and they have been tight-lipped because of their economic and strategic ties with India. And therefore, you have a limitation there. We have seen the limitations of multilateral diplomacy and traditional diplomacy because, let me tell you very frankly and candidly, that the steps that we have taken so far are not going to make a material difference in the chamber of the United Nations Security Council or in the halls, closed halls of the Human Rights Council or the General Assembly. We have to move out. I'm coming to the operative part of my statement, and that is that we must internationalize the Kashmir movement. And there the political leadership of Pakistan can demonstrate or undertake new initiatives. And how would they do that? That this Kashmir movement has to move out from closed chambers and rooms to squares, streets and highways. You do that by involving global citizenry. As it happened in the case of international civil rights movement in the United States of America, against apartheid in South Africa, against Vietnam War, because this issue is of that dimension. Kashmiris are not aliens on this planet. They are very much part of this planet. So it is the responsibility of the international community to get involved, because this hands-off traditional approach would not work. Because if we pursue the traditional approach, the demography in Kashmir would have changed in the next 2 years, and there would be no Kashmir to defend. It will slip out of your hands. It would be even unlike the occupied Palestinian territories. Because I have been telling people that Israel or the Jews took 102 years to accomplish what India wants to achieve in just 2 years on such rapid pace. Time is not on our side. And another point, that we Pakistanis and Kashmiris go abroad and give all sorts of explanations. Islam means peace. We are not terrorists. And we are peace-loving people. Kashmir is being brutalized. For God's sake, go and tell the world that the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, that its 6 million cadres who are being trained militarily and who are being indoctrinated in a violent doctrine